Noah Reeves wasn't just stepping into Haven Enterprises to fill a new position. He was entering it as an undercover operative of sorts. His mission was significant. Not only was he to familiarize himself with the company's structure, but he was also tasked with assessing its internal culture, which had been flagged for issues ranging from toxic management to discriminatory practices. It wasn't a typical onboarding process for a future CEO. But then again, Robert Sterling, the current CEO, wasn't looking for a typical successor. Sterling's vision for Haven Enterprises was that of a revitalized company, a place where talent could thrive and where the work environment wasn't defined by hidden biases, manipulation, and discrimination. For Noah, this was personal. He understood that his role went beyond merely crunching numbers and attending strategy meetings. The boardroom had assigned him a much deeper responsibility, identifying and rooting out the core issues plaguing the workplace from the inside out. Sterling, being acutely aware of his company's image and the increasingly dissatisfied murmurings among employees, had confided in Noah about the severity of the problems. Sterling's decision to keep Noah's identity under wraps wasn't merely strategic, it was essential. If the real objective was to transform the company's toxic culture, then Noah needed to experience it firsthand, without the shield of his future title influencing the way people treated him. When Noah walked into the sleek corporate building of Haven Enterprises, he looked every bit like a mid-level recruit. He wore a crisp but modest suit, carried a well-worn leather briefcase, and had an expression of eager professionalism that masked his real intentions. As he navigated through the lobby, taking in the bustling scene of employees on their way to meetings or engaged in hasty conversations, he reminded himself of his purpose. The journey he was about to embark on wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. The company needed more than cosmetic changes or occasional speeches on inclusivity. It required an overhaul from the ground up. At the core of Noah's mission was understanding why certain managers, like Tom Franklin, seemed to thrive despite ongoing complaints of discrimination and toxicity. Tom wasn't just another supervisor. He was a symbol of the old guard at Haven Enterprises. The rumors about his controlling nature, his tendency to take credit for his team's successes, and his disdain for change had reached Noah's ears long before he walked through those glass doors. When Noah reported to his assigned floor, he saw Tom Franklin waiting, standing with an air of impatient authority. Tom wasn't an imposing figure in terms of stature, but his demeanor demanded attention. He had the build of a former athlete who had softened around the edges, and a face that seemed to perpetually convey both irritation and self-satisfaction. Tom's handshake was firm, but lacked sincerity. It was the kind of handshake given by someone who believed they were supposed to lead, not welcome. The greeting that followed was just as hollow, a rehearsed line about being glad to have Noah on board, peppered with the kind of forced enthusiasm that implied the exact opposite. It didn't take long for the dismissiveness to follow. Tom began with what he probably considered subtle jabs, a tone laced with condescension, as if Noah had somehow stumbled his way into the company. "Hope you're ready to jump right in," Tom said, smirking slightly. "We've got some real work that needs doing. No time for hand-holding." For Noah, this initial encounter was a clear message of what he was dealing with. He could see right through Tom's facade of faux mentorship. There was no genuine interest in guiding a new team member. Instead, there was a calculated arrogance, a way of establishing superiority before any real interactions had even begun. It was evident that Tom saw himself as the gatekeeper of Haven Enterprises, the self-appointed judge of who was worthy of being there and who wasn't. Noah offered nothing but a neutral nod in return, deciding it was best to keep his reactions controlled and his expressions unreadable. Letting Tom's assumptions guide their interactions would provide Noah the insight he needed. If Tom saw him as just another recruit, even better. The less suspicious Tom was, the more revealing his behavior would be. As Tom led Noah through the office, introducing him to other employees, it became clear that Tom wielded his authority not through overt aggression, but through a more insidious kind of power. Quiet manipulation and carefully crafted words that ensured everyone knew their place. Each introduction was brief and disingenuous, more of an afterthought than a genuine effort to integrate Noah into the team. Tom's tone was cordial on the surface, but there was an undercurrent of thinly veiled disdain whenever he mentioned Noah's responsibilities or background, as if he saw him as nothing more than a formality the company had to endure. The most revealing moment came when Tom casually introduced Noah to a group of senior team members gathered around a table. "Everyone, this is Noah," Tom said, his voice almost patronizing. "He's here to help us with, well, a bit of everything, I suppose." The remark seemed innocuous enough, but there was a dismissive quality to it, a way of framing Noah as someone insignificant. The response from the group was mixed. Some nodded politely, while others barely acknowledged his presence. This wasn't unusual for a new hire, but there was a noticeable lack of warmth, a subtle detachment that mirrored Tom's attitude. Noah sensed an unspoken hierarchy at play, and it was clear that Tom had no intention of letting anyone forget where they stood within it. Throughout this initial introduction to Haven Enterprises, Noah maintained his composed demeanor, keenly aware that he was still gathering intel. But beneath that calm exterior, he was piecing together a clearer picture of Tom Franklin, the self-assured, controlling manager who thrived on subtle intimidation and carefully hidden biases. Noah's mission was only just beginning, but already he could feel the weight of the challenges ahead. Tom Franklin wasn't just a problematic supervisor. He was the embodiment of everything that had gone wrong in Haven Enterprises. Tom Franklin wasted no time in revealing his true colors. From the moment Noah was introduced to his new team, the tension between them was palpable, though Tom likely believed he was doing a great job of hiding it. Tom's every word seemed to carry an undertone, hinting at his discomfort with Noah's presence. To Tom, Noah wasn't just a new employee. He was an anomaly, someone whose presence required an explanation that fit within Tom's narrow worldview. It began subtly, as most discriminatory behavior often does. Tom made passing remarks that seemed innocuous on the surface, but dripped with condescension upon closer inspection. When he talked about the company's recent push for diversity, his words seemed chosen with careful intent to minimize the importance of the initiative. Tom's favorite phrase was, "You know, it's good that we're bringing in new perspectives and all, but sometimes it's better to stick with what works." It wasn't just the words, though. It was the smirk that followed, the barely perceptible sneer that conveyed how he really felt. Tom wasn't just uncomfortable with Noah's presence. He was actively trying to belittle it. Noah, however, was no stranger to this kind of treatment. He recognized the tactics for what they were, veiled attempts to undermine his confidence and authority. Tom's strategy relied on the assumption that Noah wouldn't push back, that he would either overlook these jabs or not have the strength to call them out. What Tom didn't know was that Noah wasn't just prepared to endure these remarks. He was cataloging them, piecing together a detailed picture of the toxic environment that Robert Sterling had sent him to clean up. For Noah, each thinly veiled insult and each sarcastic comment was another thread in a tapestry of evidence he was quietly gathering. As the first day wore on, Noah's observations deepened. He started to see the broader landscape of problems within the office, and it was evident that Tom wasn't acting in isolation. He was a symptom of a much larger issue. There was a palpable sense of apathy among the employees, particularly those who were lower in the corporate hierarchy. People seemed disengaged, their energy sapped by what could only be described as a hostile work environment. The hierarchy wasn't just evident in the seating arrangements or job titles. It was ingrained in the daily interactions. Tom's condescending remarks extended beyond Noah. During meetings, he would constantly interrupt junior team members, correcting them in a way that came off as more of a public chastisement than constructive feedback. He treated newer employees like they were there to be seen, not heard, rarely giving them a chance to speak up or contribute. There was a pervasive atmosphere of passive-aggressive control, where employees were constantly walking on eggshells, fearing that any small mistake or misplaced comment might draw Tom's ire. This wasn't just a matter of poor leadership. It was a power dynamic built on intimidation and subtle insults. Noah made a point to stay composed, absorbing these details without letting on that he was taking mental notes. He wanted to remain as inconspicuous as possible while collecting information. He wasn't just observing Tom. He was watching the rest of the team and noting how they responded to him. It was clear that some people had grown resigned to Tom's behavior, having either adapted or retreated into a state of professional indifference. Others, mostly the senior staff who had managed to earn Tom's favor, seemed to tolerate him out of necessity rather than respect. It wasn't long before Tom's behavior escalated from passive-aggressive remarks to outright racist comments. During an office meeting, as the team discussed the challenges facing the company's hiring strategies, Tom couldn't resist making an offhand remark. "I just hope we're not stuck with another one of these diversity hires," he said, with a chuckle that suggested he expected others to join in on the joke. The reaction in the room was telling. Some team members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting around as if seeking an escape. A few forced laughs followed, shallow and weak, betraying the discomfort beneath. But there were also those who remained stone-faced, offering no reaction at all, as if they had heard similar comments before and had learned to keep their thoughts to themselves. Noah remained silent, his face betraying no hint of emotion, though inwardly he was furious. He wasn't surprised by Tom's words, but he was disappointed to see the lack of open resistance from the rest of the team. Noah knew he couldn't respond right away. He had to pick his battles carefully. He couldn't afford to play all his cards at once, not if he wanted to unravel Tom's control in a way that exposed the deeper rot within the company's culture. So, he stayed silent for the moment, making a mental note of who had laughed, who had stayed quiet, and who had seemed genuinely uncomfortable. All of it was important, not just in understanding Tom, but in understanding how this toxic culture had taken root and persisted for so long. The opportunity to challenge Tom came during a team lunch that he had organized. It was one of those informal gatherings where managers like Tom tried to maintain the illusion of camaraderie while subtly asserting their dominance. As the team settled around a large table at a nearby restaurant, Tom seemed to relish his role as the orchestrator of this social event. He cracked jokes, many of them thinly veiled digs at his subordinates, with a particular focus on Noah. At one point, Tom made what he thought was a clever joke, laced with just enough racial insinuation to make it clear who the target was. "I guess Noah here is bringing in a bit of flavor to our team," he said, with a grin that screamed self-satisfaction. He paused, clearly expecting a round of approving chuckles from the table. Noah didn't let the silence linger. He met Tom's gaze directly, his expression firm and unyielding. "That's an interesting choice of words, Tom," Noah said, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge. "But I'd prefer if we kept our conversations focused on the work, not on assumptions about what any of us bring based on our background." The words hung in the air, and Tom's grin faltered, a brief flash of surprise crossing his face. Noah's response hadn't been confrontational, but it had carried enough weight to make Tom squirm. The rest of the table remained silent, their eyes darting between the two of them. Tom forced a laugh, trying to brush it off, but it was clear that the power dynamic had shifted, if only slightly. For a moment, Tom's mask of control had cracked, revealing a hint of uncertainty beneath. Tom's resentment towards Noah grew after that. It wasn't in his nature to let a challenge to his authority go unanswered. But instead of confronting Noah directly, Tom took a more insidious approach. He began assigning Noah projects that were designed to fail. Tasks with impossible deadlines, incomplete instructions, or faulty data. It was clear that Tom was trying to set Noah up for failure, hoping that he could use any misstep as ammunition against him. Noah saw through Tom's ploy immediately. He didn't let on that he knew what was happening, but he began documenting every task, every instruction, and every change in the project parameters. He meticulously tracked each instance where Tom's behavior deviated from standard procedure, knowing that he would need this evidence later. Tom wanted to see him struggle, but Noah refused to give him that satisfaction. Instead, he stayed calm, focused on doing his job as best he could, despite the hurdles being thrown in his way. The confrontation at lunch had shifted the dynamics between them, but it had also set in motion a chain of events that neither of them could fully control. Tom's attempts to undermine Noah had become more desperate, and Noah's resolve to expose Tom's behavior had only grown stronger. It was a silent battle, one fought with actions and carefully chosen words, but it was clear that the stakes were higher than ever. For Noah, this wasn't just about proving himself. It was about exposing a toxic culture and holding the people responsible for it accountable. And as far as he was concerned, the real fight was only just beginning. Tom's determination to undermine Noah was growing, and he wasn't trying to hide it anymore. It started with simple, petty acts, misplacing key documents, forgetting to invite Noah to crucial meetings, or reassigning his responsibilities without prior notice. Tom's tactics weren't clever or intricate, but they were designed to frustrate Noah and make him question his own capabilities. To an inexperienced employee, these stunts might have seemed like a series of unfortunate miscommunications. But Noah was neither inexperienced nor naive. He recognized sabotage when he saw it, and Tom's increasing desperation was all the evidence he needed. Noah's strategy wasn't just about surviving Tom's schemes. It was about staying one step ahead. He meticulously documented each instance of Tom's interference, keeping detailed records of the tasks assigned to him, the deadlines given, and the shifting expectations. He backed up every email, saved copies of every report, and maintained a private log of their interactions. Noah understood that proving discrimination or manipulation in the workplace wasn't about catching a single dramatic incident. It was about demonstrating a pattern of behavior, a series of calculated actions designed to push someone out or break their spirit. Tom's efforts became more brazen over time. He began assigning Noah projects with inconsistent or misleading data, knowing that any errors would reflect poorly on Noah's competence. One project involved analyzing client satisfaction reports for a major account. When Noah received the data, it was in complete disarray, missing key sections, with several reports seemingly edited to show conflicting information. Tom handed it to him with a smug expression, pretending that it was simply a challenging task that he was trusting Noah to handle. "You've got this, right?" Tom said, with a tone that barely concealed his hope that Noah would fail. Noah worked late that night, sifting through the mess and reorganizing the reports into something coherent. He cross-referenced data from previous years, identified discrepancies, and corrected errors where possible. Noah knew that even if he did everything perfectly, Tom would still find a way to criticize his work. But his goal wasn't just to complete the project. It was to show that he wouldn't be defeated by sabotage. Sure enough, when Noah submitted his final report, Tom called him out during a team meeting, criticizing the findings and implying that Noah's analysis was incomplete. Tom's words were carefully chosen to make it sound like he was offering constructive feedback, but the real intention was clear. He wanted to undermine Noah's credibility in front of their colleagues. Noah let Tom speak without interrupting, knowing that challenging him publicly would only escalate the situation. Instead, Noah listened, observing the reactions of his coworkers and noting which of them seemed to be nodding in agreement versus those who remained silent. Later that day, Noah received a private message from Grace Sullivan, the HR representative. Grace had always struck Noah as perceptive and professional, and her quiet efficiency often made her seem more like a background figure in the office than an active participant in the day-to-day conflicts. But appearances, Noah had learned, could be deceiving. Grace requested a meeting with him, framing it as an informal check-in. When Noah entered her office, Grace greeted him with a knowing smile and a look that suggested she had been watching the situation closely. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Noah, I've noticed some things," she began, her tone careful but firm. "I've seen how Tom interacts with you, and it's not the first time he's used these tactics." Grace proceeded to share some of the history she had observed during her tenure. Tom had a reputation for sabotaging newcomers he perceived as threats, especially those who didn't fit into his narrow definition of who belonged at Haven Enterprises. According to Grace, Tom had used similar tactics with previous employees, assigning misleading projects, withholding information, and then publicly framing them as incompetent. Each time, Tom's connections within the company had protected him from facing any real consequences. Complaints had been raised before, but without concrete evidence, HR's hands were often tied. Noah appreciated Grace's discretion, but he also knew that if she had approached him, it meant she believed something could be done this time. "I've been documenting everything," Noah admitted, keeping his voice steady. "But I need to be strategic about when and how to present it." Grace nodded, her expression a mix of concern and resolve. "Tom's been here a long time, and he knows how to manipulate the system. But if you have enough evidence, it might be time to think about who else you can trust." The conversation left Noah with a renewed sense of purpose. He was no longer facing this battle alone, and Grace's insight into Tom's history gave him valuable context. Still, he knew that timing was everything. If he revealed his evidence too soon, Tom might retaliate or try to discredit him further. Noah needed to be patient and wait for the right moment to confront Tom directly. Tom, however, wasn't done with his schemes. His next attempt to sabotage Noah was more elaborate. He assigned Noah to lead a new client project, deliberately providing disorganized and misleading information that would make it nearly impossible to deliver a successful outcome. The client's specifications were vague, and the internal documents related to the project were riddled with inconsistencies. Tom even went so far as to accidentally omit key details from the brief, knowing that any errors would ultimately fall on Noah's shoulders. Despite the challenges, Noah stayed focused, reaching out to colleagues in different departments to cross-reference information and clarify the client's needs. He spent long hours reworking the project plan, double-checking every detail, and addressing each inconsistency he could find. He wasn't just trying to do his job. He was building a case against Tom, proving that even with every obstacle in his path, he could still succeed. When it came time to present the project to senior leadership, Tom seized the opportunity to publicly frame Noah as incompetent. He made subtle but pointed remarks about the project's initial setbacks, implying that Noah's lack of experience might have been the cause. Noah let him speak, waiting for the moment when Tom's accusations began to sound like personal attacks rather than professional critiques. Then, calmly and with unwavering composure, Noah presented his work, outlining the challenges he had faced and how he had overcome them. He didn't directly accuse Tom of sabotage, but he made it clear that the difficulties he had encountered were not of his own making. After the meeting, Noah knew it was time to confront Tom privately. He had given Tom every opportunity to change his behavior, but it was clear that Tom's sense of invincibility had only grown stronger. In Tom's mind, he was untouchable, shielded by his connections and the false narrative he had built over the years. When Noah approached Tom's office, he found the door slightly ajar, and Tom was seated at his desk, reviewing some documents. Noah knocked once before stepping inside, closing the door behind him. Tom looked up, his expression shifting from mild surprise to guarded annoyance. "Tom," Noah began, his voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." Tom leaned back in his chair, feigning indifference. "If this is about the meeting, Noah, I think it went well enough. You've got potential, but there's always room for improvement." Noah didn't let the bait distract him. "It's not about the meeting," he replied, his eyes locked on Tom's. "It's about the pattern of behavior I've seen from you, how you've intentionally undermined my work and tried to sabotage my progress." Tom's expression hardened, and he leaned forward, trying to regain control of the conversation. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his tone icy. "You're new here, Noah, and sometimes it takes a while to learn how things work. If you're feeling overwhelmed..." Noah cut him off, his voice steady and unyielding. "I've documented everything, Tom. Every misleading project, every instance where you withheld information, and every attempt you've made to discredit me in front of the team. I have enough evidence to prove that this isn't just incompetence, it's deliberate sabotage." For a moment, Tom seemed at a loss for words, his usual mask of confidence slipping. He opened his mouth to respond, but Noah continued before he could speak. "You're not the first person to try this, and you won't be the last. But what you need to understand is that I won't be intimidated or manipulated. You've crossed a line, and there are consequences for that." Noah could see the realization dawning on Tom's face, the recognition that this wasn't just another employee he could bully or dismiss. For the first time, Tom seemed genuinely rattled, his self-assured facade cracking under the weight of his own actions. But Noah didn't wait for a response. He turned and left the office, knowing that the next move would be Tom's, but confident that the balance of power had shifted. It wasn't about winning a single confrontation or proving himself to Tom. For Noah, this was about making it clear that the old ways of doing things were over. Tom's reign of manipulation and discrimination had gone unchecked for too long, and Noah intended to see that it ended, not just for himself, but for everyone else who had endured the same treatment in silence. Now, it was only a matter of time before the rest of the company saw the truth as well. The tension in the office was almost palpable in the days leading up to the big announcement. Whispers circulated between cubicles, speculation about what the CEO's mysterious meeting would entail. For weeks, the company had been abuzz with rumors of impending changes, but few knew just how significant those changes would be. Tom Franklin seemed oblivious to the storm brewing around him, still convinced of his own invincibility. He carried on as he always did, dismissing new ideas, belittling those who challenged him, and taking subtle jabs at Noah whenever the opportunity arose. The day of the company-wide meeting arrived, and employees filed into the large conference room with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Some whispered amongst themselves, sharing their theories about budget cuts or reorganizations, while others nervously checked their phones, trying to predict what was coming. Robert Sterling, the current CEO, was known for being reserved, a man who rarely held meetings without a clear agenda. This unannounced gathering was unusual, and the ambiguity made people uneasy. Noah remained silent, watching the room fill up from a seat near the back. He had chosen a position where he could observe everyone's reactions without drawing attention to himself. He could see the familiar faces of his colleagues, many of whom wore expressions of concern or cautious optimism. Tom, on the other hand, was seated near the front, his back straight and his demeanor exuding confidence. To him, this was just another routine meeting, another opportunity to reaffirm his importance within the company. When Robert Sterling entered the room, the murmurs faded into silence. The CEO walked with a deliberate pace, his face serious yet composed. He stepped up to the podium and scanned the crowd, his gaze lingering briefly on Noah, as if acknowledging the culmination of a plan that had been months in the making. Sterling's voice was calm but authoritative as he began to speak, thanking everyone for their hard work and dedication. "As you all know," Sterling said, his eyes sweeping the room, "Haven Enterprises has been through a period of significant growth and transition. We've faced challenges, and I've been reflecting on the culture we want to build for the future." The room was tense with anticipation. People shifted in their seats, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Sterling continued, his tone measured and resolute. "In order to create an environment where everyone feels respected, valued, and heard, we need to address some of the internal challenges we've been facing, issues that go beyond business strategies and into the very heart of our company culture." At this point, Tom shifted uncomfortably in his chair. It wasn't an obvious move, but it was noticeable to anyone paying close attention. Noah saw the first glimmer of unease in Tom's posture, and he knew that Tom was beginning to realize this meeting wasn't going to be the routine corporate update he had expected. Sterling's next words were the catalyst that would change everything. "I'd like to introduce someone who will be playing a significant role in leading Haven Enterprises into this new chapter. Many of you have already worked with him in different capacities, but it's time to formally introduce him in his new role. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome our new CEO, Noah Reeves." The room fell into a stunned silence. A few audible gasps escaped, and heads turned as employees processed what they had just heard. For a moment, it seemed as though time had stopped. All eyes turned to the back of the room, where Noah now stood, calm and composed. He could feel the weight of 100 gazes on him, but his focus was on one person in particular, Tom Franklin. Tom's face was a portrait of shock. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and then to something resembling horror. It was the realization that he hadn't just underestimated Noah. He had entirely misjudged him. Noah watched as Tom's confident facade crumbled, the recognition dawning on him that the man he had been trying to undermine and discredit was, in fact, his new boss. Noah stepped forward, moving through the rows of chairs with quiet confidence. As he approached the podium, he caught snippets of hushed conversations, whispers of, "Did you know?" and "How did we miss this?" The reactions were a mix of awe, confusion, and, for a few, satisfaction. There were those who had silently rooted for Noah, colleagues who had noticed his resilience and integrity, but had never imagined the full extent of his role within the company. When Noah reached the podium, he took a deep breath, letting the silence linger for a moment before speaking. "Thank you, Robert," he began, his voice steady. "It's an honor to stand before you all today, not just as a colleague, but as someone who believes deeply in the values of this company and its people." He paused, meeting the eyes of several employees, ensuring they felt seen and included in this moment. "For the past few months, I've had the opportunity to work alongside many of you, to learn from your experiences, and to understand both the strengths and challenges within our workplace. What I've witnessed is a team full of dedicated and talented individuals, but also a culture that, in some areas, has fallen short of our ideals." Noah's words were carefully chosen, but there was a clarity and directness to his tone that left no room for misinterpretation. "During my time here, I've observed behaviors and practices that do not align with the values we want to uphold. Behaviors that undermine trust, respect, and accountability. And I'm here to tell you that this is going to change." The room was silent, the weight of Noah's words hanging heavily in the air. He didn't need to name names. Everyone knew who and what he was referring to. Noah could see the uncomfortable shifts in some of his colleagues, the realization that the status quo was being dismantled. Tom, now visibly pale, seemed to be trying to process what was happening. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. His confidence had evaporated, leaving only a shell of the man who had once wielded his authority like a weapon. Noah turned his gaze towards Tom, not with anger, but with the unwavering resolve of someone who knew what needed to be done. "There are individuals within this company who have thrived on manipulation, favoritism, and discrimination," Noah continued, his voice carrying across the room. "This is not acceptable, and it will not be tolerated moving forward." Noah's next words were a direct challenge to everything Tom represented. "Under my leadership, there will be accountability, transparency, and a culture of respect. Everyone here deserves to work in an environment where they are valued for their contributions, not judged or undermined based on preconceived notions." It was a declaration of intent, a promise to the company and its employees that the era of unchecked toxicity and discrimination was over. Noah's message was clear. The company was entering a new era, and those who couldn't adapt would no longer be welcome. For Tom, the realization of his impending downfall was swift and brutal. His face was ashen, his posture slumped, as if the weight of his own actions had finally caught up with him. He looked around, searching for an ally, but found only the cold stares of colleagues who had seen through his facade. The reality was sinking in. He had lost control, and there was no one left to defend him. After the meeting concluded, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Employees began to talk more openly, sharing stories and expressing cautious optimism about the changes to come. The announcement had not just been a declaration of leadership. It had been a turning point for the entire company. Tom, however, remained frozen in place, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. He was a man who had built his power on manipulation and fear, and now that power was crumbling before his eyes. Noah's words had left no room for ambiguity. Tom's time at Haven Enterprises was coming to an end. As the employees began to file out of the conference room, Noah lingered near the exit, shaking hands and exchanging brief words of reassurance. He knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey to rebuild trust and reshape the company's culture. But for now, he took a moment to appreciate the significance of the day's events. Tom, realizing that he was cornered with nowhere to turn, approached Noah with one last attempt to salvage his position. His voice was shaky, and there was a pleading edge to his tone. "Noah," he began, trying to muster some semblance of authority, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. If we could just—" Noah raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Tom," he said, his voice calm but firm, "there's no misunderstanding. This isn't about misunderstandings or miscommunications. This is about accountability." Tom opened his mouth to protest, but Noah continued, unyielding. "I've documented every instance of your behavior, every act of sabotage, every discriminatory remark, and every attempt to manipulate and intimidate your colleagues. You've thrived on a culture of fear and favoritism, but that ends today." There was no anger in Noah's voice, only a quiet determination. He had already made up his mind, and there was nothing Tom could say that would change it. Tom, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, tried to stammer out a defense, but the words failed him. He looked around, realizing that the office he had once ruled with an iron fist was no longer his to control. Noah didn't wait for Tom to respond. He simply nodded to the security personnel, who had been discreetly standing by, and they stepped forward to escort Tom out of the building. It wasn't a dramatic scene. There were no outbursts, no dramatic pleas for mercy. Tom walked quietly, his head bowed, as the weight of his actions finally caught up with him. As Tom was led away, Noah felt a sense of closure. He knew that this wasn't the end of the challenges he would face, but it was a significant step towards building a company where integrity, respect, and accountability were the cornerstones of success. He turned back to the remaining employees, many of whom were watching with a mixture of relief and anticipation, and offered them a reassuring nod. The message was clear. The old ways were gone, and a new era had begun. With Tom escorted out of the building, the immediate wave of reactions rippled through the office. There was a collective intake of breath, as if everyone had been holding it, unsure of what to do or say. It wasn't every day that a manager of Tom's stature faced such a dramatic downfall, especially in a company where his influence had seemed unassailable for so long. In the moments that followed, the atmosphere felt different, not just lighter, but filled with an undercurrent of cautious hope. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in years, many employees felt like they were finally being heard and that real change might be possible. Noah returned to his office, taking a moment to reflect. The battle with Tom had been intense and mentally exhausting, but it wasn't the end. He knew that what had just happened was only the first step in a much larger effort to transform Haven Enterprises into the kind of company that valued integrity and respect above all else. The work ahead was daunting, but it was exactly the kind of challenge Noah had signed up for. After Tom's departure, Noah spent the following days meeting with employees from all levels of the company. He wanted to understand the struggles and frustrations they had faced under the old management, and to give them a chance to voice their concerns without fear of retribution. Some meetings were formal, held in conference rooms with multiple team members, while others were more casual, taking place over coffee or in the break room. Noah believed in the power of listening, and he knew that these conversations were crucial to building trust and establishing a new culture. What struck Noah during these meetings was the depth of resentment and distrust that had built up over the years. Employees described a culture of favoritism and manipulation, where promotions were based more on who you knew than on what you achieved. Junior employees felt stifled, their ideas dismissed before they were even given a chance. Many admitted that they had been actively discouraged from speaking up about issues, fearing backlash or retaliation. It was clear to Noah that Tom hadn't acted alone. He had merely thrived in an environment that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Noah's goal wasn't just to listen, though. It was to take meaningful action. After each meeting, he made a list of key issues and possible solutions, consulting with senior leadership and trusted advisors to develop a comprehensive plan. He knew that real change wouldn't come from a single announcement or policy shift. It required a sustained effort and a commitment to holding everyone accountable, including himself. One of the first major initiatives Noah introduced was an anonymous feedback system where employees could report issues or concerns without fear of retaliation. He worked closely with Grace Sullivan, the HR representative who had been instrumental in bringing Tom's behavior to light, to design the system and ensure that it was secure and effective. Noah knew that building trust required more than just promises. It required creating structures that empowered employees and gave them a voice. Grace, who had been in the company long enough to witness the full extent of Tom's rise and fall, became one of Noah's most important allies. She had a keen understanding of the internal dynamics and knew where the pressure points were. Together, they implemented new training programs focused on leadership accountability, inclusivity, and ethical decision-making. These weren't just cursory workshops designed to tick a box. They were in-depth, ongoing programs aimed at fundamentally shifting the way managers approached their roles. Noah also made it clear that the company's policies would be changing to reflect this new direction. A zero-tolerance stance on discriminatory behavior and workplace manipulation was introduced, with clear guidelines and consequences. He communicated these changes transparently, holding multiple company-wide meetings and sending detailed updates to every employee. Noah understood that change required consistency and clarity, and he was determined to lead by example. As these changes were implemented, there were moments of resistance from some employees who had benefited from the old system. A few senior managers, who had been close to Tom and who had supported or enabled his behavior, pushed back against the new policies. They viewed Noah's reforms as an overreaction, arguing that the company had always operated this way and that any issues were isolated incidents. But Noah stood firm. He scheduled private meetings with each of these managers, giving them a chance to voice their concerns while also making it clear that there would be no tolerance for the old ways of doing things. For those who refused to adapt, the consequences were swift and definitive. Tom's departure had sent a message, but it was Noah's continued actions that cemented the new direction. He wasn't interested in creating a culture of fear. His goal was to build one of integrity and fairness. He emphasized collaboration and transparency, encouraging managers to support and mentor their teams rather than use their authority to control or intimidate. Slowly but surely, the company began to shift. Employees who had once been disengaged or fearful started to speak up more in meetings, offering ideas and challenging assumptions. Noah made a point to acknowledge these contributions, creating a space where innovation and open dialogue were valued. For many employees, the transformation was personal. They had spent years feeling undervalued and overlooked, and seeing someone like Tom face consequences was a validation of their experiences. It wasn't just about punishing bad behavior. It was about creating an environment where everyone felt like they had a role to play and a voice that mattered. As these changes took root, morale began to improve, and employee engagement steadily increased. Noah knew that there would always be challenges and setbacks, and that true cultural change was a long-term process. But as the company moved forward, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He hadn't just taken on a job. He had taken on a mission to redefine what leadership and accountability meant at Haven Enterprises. One afternoon, a few weeks after Tom's departure, Noah found himself standing by the window of his office, looking out over the city skyline. He reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point, from the first day he had walked into the company undercover, to the moment he had stood before the entire organization and revealed the truth. It had been a difficult path, filled with uncertainty and moments of doubt, but it had also been a necessary one. In many ways, Noah felt that the hardest part of his journey was behind him. Exposing the toxic elements within the company and removing people like Tom had been a pivotal moment, but the real work of rebuilding was just beginning. He knew that he couldn't do it alone, and he was grateful for the support and dedication of people like Grace, who had stood by him and believed in his vision for the company. Noah's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on his office door. Grace stepped inside, carrying a stack of reports. "I thought you might want to see these," she said with a smile. "Employee satisfaction surveys from the past month. There's been a significant increase in positive feedback." Noah took the reports, flipping through them with interest. The comments from employees were encouraging, expressing appreciation for the changes and the new sense of openness within the company. There were still challenges to address and lingering issues to resolve, but the progress was undeniable. Grace watched him read the reports, her smile widening. "It's not perfect yet," she admitted, "but it's a start." Noah nodded, feeling a sense of quiet satisfaction. "It's more than a start," he replied. "It's a new beginning." As he looked back on the journey that had brought him here, Noah felt a deep sense of responsibility to the people he now led. He had been given a unique opportunity to create something meaningful, to build a company where integrity and respect weren't just words on a mission statement, but values that guided every decision. Noah's vision for Haven Enterprises was ambitious, but it was rooted in a simple belief that a company's greatest strength lies in its people, and that those people deserve to be treated with dignity and fairness. It was a vision that he was determined to see through, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. With a final nod to Grace, Noah set the reports aside and returned to his work. There was still much to be done, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that the future was bright. The culture at Haven Enterprises was changing, and with every step forward, Noah felt more confident that he and his team could create something truly exceptional. A company where everyone had the chance to thrive, and where the legacy of manipulation and discrimination was nothing but a distant memory.